would say that I came to this from having organized another candidate college in New York City about 6 months ago. And the idea was to provide the resources both in live events like this and online for people to be able to run for office, to have the information that you need, that insiders who have run for office before oftentimes have at their fingertips, but people who have never run before find really baffling. So I would urge you to look at the videos that we put together from the previous candidate college on New York Civic's website. And also, we're trying to give you as practical and as worthwhile information as possible. This isn't a theoretical discussion, but really to provide you the information that you need to run a viable and successful campaign. So I'm not going to spend a great deal of time introducing our panelists because I'd like them to tell their stories as a way of explaining to you how maybe you can become an elected official as well. I would like to urge everybody to sign up for a morning email that our newspaper puts out for free. If you go to cityandstateny.com, we have something called the First Read, which if you speak to Governor Cuomo or to Mayor Bloomberg, they'll tell you that it's an absolutely invaluable resource, that it gives you the morning rundown on all the major stories that are going on in politics in the state. And it's so valuable because information empowers you, particularly when you're running for elected office. So it's a free email. I'd like to urge you to sign up for the First Read. Okay, it gives me cityandstateny.com, and you'll see there's a link for the First Read. And we have copies of our newspaper in the back, but the email, I'd say, is really something that will be of great utility to all of you. To my left is Senator Mark Grisanti, and we'll get into his story in a second, but it's a great pleasure to welcome Senator Grisanti. Next to him is Helen Hudson, who's a council member from Syracuse, recently elected, very exciting, and legislator Kevin Harvick, so from the Erie County Legislature. So let's start with this. Senator Grisanti, how did you become an elected official?
Well, I first actually ran for office in 2008 for New York State Senate in the 60th District. Never was involved in politics before, really never paid attention to politics. When I ran, I had literally no lines really to run on. Went out and got signatures by myself, along with family and friends. Was going against a political machine, was going against somebody who was a career politician, and was going against somebody that had a strong backing of various factions. And in 2008, I received approximately 35% of the vote. I mean, you lost. I thought that was terrible. A lot of people came up to me afterwards and said, that was a pretty good showing for not having really any strong backing. 2010, I was approached to run again for the same seat. And at that time, I was thinking about it. Was a Democrat. However, the Democrats, they were the party itself, not the people, were not going to allow me to get on the line and run. So they did what's called the Wilson Bakuda on the Republican line, where you're a Democrat, but you run on the Republican line. And we came out very strong, came out with a message, and literally did a campaign in about, after the petitions kind of hung low, but literally did a campaign in about 8 weeks. We were successful in that seat, and then moved forward from there, and now 2 years later we have to, there's another election that's coming up. So, I'm proud of what I've accomplished in the last 2 years. My goal was to bring back resources and to make Western New York, in particular our region, not be ignored any longer, and I think that's been accomplished in the last 2 years by a lot of the items that are coming here, not only by way of the state, but development, resources for jobs, and so on and so forth. But very difficult, as far as leaving family and going to Albany, but that's basically how I got involved. I mean, as far as anybody else in my family, I think my father ran for the assembly. I think I was about 4 or 5 years old when he ran for an assembly district in Buffalo, and ever ever since then, there was nobody else in the family that ran for politics.
And Helen, how did you get involved?
And actually, I'm going to go back to what the senator said. I was never involved in politics. I was an auto worker. And I went from being an auto worker to a fundraiser. And in 2010, there was a seat that opened up. And I was approached and I was asked if I would consider the nomination for the seat. Well, thought it was going to be an easy process. I'd step right into the seat. I was a controversial candidate. I had the colleagues that I work with now, they were very resistant to me being nominated to this position. So I started my campaign in early 2010 because I knew then that I was going to run because of the opposition. As was stated earlier, the fire in my belly, it was there then. So I went on an almost 14, 15-month campaign. It was interesting. I'm in touch with the community now. I'm an activist, so I've always been in touch with my community. But I actually learned my community on a bigger scale, going door to door, talking to people, listening to people, and finding out that that's really all anybody cared about, was that someone listened to them and understood where they were coming from. So we did the 14-month process. I was nominated by the Democratic Committee to be the designated candidate. And from there it started. And then November 8th, it was interesting. My first run out, I came in with the highest votes throughout the city of Syracuse as a first-time at-large councilor. So for me, it was it was a trying experience. I have grandchildren, and it was hard for me to hear my grandchildren tell me that I didn't have time for them, because you're gonna spend a lot of time campaigning, knocking on doors, going out to functions and events, and you may not get home till 11 o'clock at night. And I do work a full-time job. I'm a part-time elected, and I have an 8-hour job. So between working, running my campaign, and then trying to juggle everything in between my life, it became very strenuous. But you know what? In the end, when the numbers were called and I was the winner, it was well worth it.
Legislator Hardwick?
It was 37 years ago, June 11th, 1975. I was a high school senior. During my senior year in high school, I had been elected to the student council as a representative to the Board of Education in a little school district just south of the city of Binghamton, where I grew up. And during my sophomore year, we had endured a 6-week teacher strike in which the school district decided to keep the schools open with permanent substitutes. We all remember what high school was like, and we always loved to have substitute teachers because you could get away with murder. There were no murders during that 6-week period, but we came close. In the junior high, I understand there were people being dangled from the second floor by their heels by other kids and all of that. Anyway, it was not a lot of learning went on during that 6 weeks. The student body became very politicized, very sympathetic with the teachers, of course, our teachers, of course. Well, during my senior year as representative to the school board, the teachers were going without a contract, and there was talk of another strike. It was at that time that I decided to run for the Board of Education as a senior. I had just turned 18. And on June 11, 1975, in a pretty startling upset in the community, I was elected. Now, I should also say that is June 11, 1975 was also the only day in my entire scholastic career that I had detention. I was skipping some classes, and they finally caught up with me. The vice principal said that he was going to put a sign in the auditorium where they had set up the voting booths, and the community members were coming in, directing people to the detention room saying, "Meet your candidate." Fortunately, he did not do that because I won the election. But it was a great experience. We still had the 18-year-old drinking age back then, so we had one heck of a party. And the 18-year-olds had just gotten to vote a few years earlier, and so a substantial portion, about half the senior class, was eligible to vote, and certainly that was part of our strategy, and we were able to win. I ran because I was passionate about something. You know, you talk about fire in the belly. There was an issue, you know, the whole pending, the looming strike, labor strife. I felt I could do something about that. Fast forward a few years later, when I was 21 and a junior at SUNY Binghamton, I was involved heavily in my town, the town of Binghamton, in youth activities, and there were some problems related to the town board and the development of a park that I felt strongly about. And I'm one of those people that made my sentiments known, and I decided to run for a councilmanic seat in the town of Binghamton, and was again fortunate enough to be elected and then subsequently re-elected. Fast forward, same thing in the city of Tonawanda. When I moved here, served 3 terms as a council member in the city of Tonawanda, and most recently county legislature. The common thread, though, is the passion. I think you have to know why you're getting involved. You have to want to do something. You have to feel that you can do a better job than the people who are there. You know, I prior to running for my latest office, that of the county legislature, I did a lot of analysis for the local TV and radio stations, had my own show on WBEN, and it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. Who would not want to pontificate for a couple hours a week, you know, with a captive audience? It was great. But I compare what I did and what I really enjoyed to that of say a movie critic or a critic of the theater, or an analyst up in the press box analyzing what's going down on the football field or the basketball court. You know, any one of them, I think, given the choice, the theater critic, the analyst up in the booth, former football player, whatever, given the choice, would rather be down on the field, would rather be up on the stage. And that's the way I felt. You know, I felt I was doing color commentary on local politics, but I wanted so much more. I thought that I could be much more effective getting involved, that passion in the belly. I think we all talk about it. If you don't have it, you know, you ought consider whether you ought to be running for office. So that's my story in brief. Thank you.
Senator, you alluded to the fact that you changed parties in between running for office, your bids for office, and also you ran as a great long shot. And I was wondering, you know, what were the lessons that you took away from your previous run for the Senate, and what did you do differently when you were ultimately successful?
You know, I would say that really, as far as between the first and second run, I mean, I was out there, you know, out on doors, literally heavy walking. Any chance I got, and I too have, you know, a full-time job as an attorney. But any chance I got, I was in neighborhoods, I was walking, I was going to events. I think the only thing that was different is that you learn to have a little bit more respect for the issues from 2008 to 2010. And I followed what happened between 2008 and 2010, and I was able to bring that to fruition. Fortunately, I ran against somebody that was making some serious mistakes and was getting a lot of press about those mistakes, and you know, we capitalized on those mistakes that were made, and we capitalized on the fact that this region was being ignored, and that resonated with the people here in Western New York and in the 60th district, and I think that's what we took out. It wasn't 2008 was more like, you know, like a carte blanche of, you know, hey, here's what I'm going to do, and then in 2010 it was or 2008 was, this is what I want to do. In 2010 it was more like, this is what I'm going to do. And to me, I felt it was an absolute privilege. Not as some people that are elected, they feel it's a right to actually be in this position. I feel it's a privilege, and I moved forward with an agenda that I stuck with, and that has come in the last couple of years. Where it's a strong record of performance, and that's what you have to do. And you also learn in the meantime that you take a lot of knives out of your back.
Councilor Hudson, what was the most eye-opening part of running for office for you? What part of the process did you not expect, and what did you think was the most valuable?
The part of the process that I didn't expect, again, is I'm going to go back to the opposition. because I guess I walked around in this little bubble thinking, you know, I had the best of all worlds. I'm a very versatile person. I belong to organized labor. I'm a community activist, volunteer world, not-for-profit business world. So I thought I could just skate through it all. But when I saw the opposition that came forward, that was kind of startling, because I figured that with the work that I do in advocacy and in the volunteer world, I'm always making sure, which is part of what my charge is now, is to have resources for the community. And I'm good at that. So I didn't think that there would be a problem with me stepping into another role to be able to advocate and bring bigger resources back. And as you said, the knife in the back, it was there. And I think that was the most eye-opening experience for me. I went home, and yes, I am a girl, and I kind of cried a little bit, and then I shook it off, and all bets were off, and we were on the track.
Maybe for all three of you, I mean, should you as a candidate anticipate any criticism of yourself, both personally and professionally? I mean, to what degree do you have to steel yourself to criticism and attacks?
You know, on Monday, for the first time in years, I cleaned out my garage. And one of the things I've done that I've never done is I've had a lot of metal in there, an old cabinet cover for an air conditioner, and a lot of other metal. And I took it to a recycling place. They made $21 on the thing too. I'm thinking I may go back there this Monday, because if we take all the knives from our backs that we talked about, I bet I could make more than $21, because that seems to be a common theme on this panel. We've all taken a knife or two. You know, here's the thing. When I've run for office 10 times. Won eight of them, and ran against Chuck Swanek twice. This may be instructive for you, Senator. The first time I ran against Chuck Swanek, turned out by the general election I was the prototypical sacrificial lamb. I was a warm body on the ballot, there to kind of take some cannon fodder, take some fire from the other candidates who were running, and just, no chance of winning by election day. Every year, the parties look for sacrificial lambs, someone to show the flag. They're not going to commit any resources to them. You're a Democrat in a heavily Republican district, or a Republican in a heavily Democratic district, and you want someone to hold that space on the ballot so you look as a party like you're doing your job. And you make them all sorts of promises. Oh yeah, we'll be there for you, we'll help you. Well, that isn't always the case. That election I lost 57 to 43. It was the first defeat in my career after six wins, and it hurt. But it wasn't as bad as it could have been, because if it were like 2 years later when I ran, when it was a very close race, where I was a threat, where I was not a sacrificial lamb, that's where I not only lost, but I got hurt. That's where the knives in the back. If you're a sacrificial lamb, you're going to lose, but you're going to come out of it unscathed. Your kids are not going to be ashamed of you being saying that that they are associated with you or anything like that. You present a threat, and if it's a high-profile race and it's an important race and it's nip and tuck, that's when both sides take liberties with the truth, take something that you think is a positive and somehow twist the facts, make that into a negative, talk about character assassination or whatever. That's when you can really get hurt. And that's where you've got to make sure that you get to the mailbox before your kids get to the mailbox and read about daddy or mommy. And I'm not, that's the way it is. Sacrificial lambs, if you're the incumbent and you've got a warm body on the ballot against you, you don't beat that person up. You just run on your own record and you win. But if you're the incumbent, or you're in the top race, you get someone who's within a point or two of you in the polls, and everybody thinks you could lose, that's when that's when you get vicious. Both sides do. And that's where people get hurt. They not only lose, but they get hurt. And that's one of my biggest concerns. Not just about myself, but about the way the system works. And you ought to know, before you make that decision to run, that if you are more than just a warm body on the ballot, that is a very, very real possibility. And you ought to consider, you ought to be ready for it, and you ought to take that into your consideration of whether to run or not.
Senator, I wanted to ask you about running with both against the party and the support of the party. How much trepidation should you approach running against a machine or an entrenched political party, and how much of that is a factor in your approach to this?
Well, I mean, it's a huge factor, because when you're running against a machine, you're running against not only a lot of people, but you're running against a lot of money. And that's something that's very tough to compete with. I mean, you look in today's paper, there's a primary that's coming up where somebody has about $40,000 and the other person has about $300,000. I mean, these are things that are realities. The realities when you run. And I think in 2008, I think I ran, and I was able to raise a total of about $75,000. I got 35% of the vote. In 2010, again, going against the machine, the funny thing about in 2010 is that the focus on the races were in other districts in Western New York. There was focus on, the 58th district, the 59th district, where literally each candidate spent over $1 million apiece. Could you imagine that for a local senate, it's over $1 million apiece? And we ran a campaign for about $190,000 and had one of the biggest upsets in New York State history, in particular in this district. And we did it by being very methodical, laying out a plan and sticking to that plan and I'm telling you, to when a specific mailing was going to go out, what neighborhoods are we going to be walking in, what are we going to do about this issue, when is this going to come out, and things just progressed from there. And I think that somebody wrote in the paper, they said it was a perfect storm of events. For me, I don't really look at things as Republican, Democrat, Independent, or Conservative. I look to try to do what is actually right for my district and for the state as a whole. That's how I approach things. I mean, I don't, I'm in the majority of the Republican Senate, but as you know, I don't vote all the time with the Republicans. There are some Democratic issues that I vote for that my conference may not like. One of those decisions, and not getting into it, cost me the Conservative Party line for this year's election. But I wasn't going to vote in fear of losing a party line. I literally had phone calls saying, if you take up this vote, you're going to lose this Conservative line and you may not get the Republican line. And I said to myself, well, I consider that a threat. What do you do? Now, there are a lot of individuals, I can tell you right now, and I'm not going to say names, but there are a lot of individuals in the New York State Senate that would have voted the same way I did, but they didn't because they were afraid that they were going to lose a particular political line. And that's not the way, that's not somebody you want in office. It's somebody that's worried about losing a line. You want somebody that's going to look at an issue on all sides, not ignore one side in favor of another side, and you're going to sit there and you're going to want somebody that's going to be able to give a solid and rational explanation as to why you voted for a certain issue. Because you'll never hear that person say, well, I voted that way because I didn't want to lose the Conservative line. That would be political suicide, but that's exactly what happens on a lot of issues about people in fear of losing a line. I'm hoping that's what resonates with people in my district and the people in Western New York, is that you try to maintain some independence in moving forward with issues that benefit the entire community as a whole and not just one segment and in fear of losing a line. So I think that that's probably the best information I can give you is really you got to talk to people on both sides of an issue, no matter what the issue was, whether it's marriage equality, whether it's hydrofracking, no matter what it is. You got to give each person respect and concern about their particular issues. There are some people in the Senate that won't even meet with one on the other side of a certain issue because they feel so strongly and impassioned a certain way, and that, you know, that's not respectful, because you have people in your community that are on each side of on an issue. And you're going to want to meet with those people and get information. And sometimes you have an issue that is strengthened by another issue, and they're put together, and that's important. So, you know, and you know, like Kevin was saying, I mean, the lies that get put out there, not only in print or media, or, you know, I look at it like this. Remember in school when you'd have that game where somebody would say something at the one end of the classroom, and by the time it got to the other end, it was completely screwed up. To me, that's what happens a lot in politics, and especially with some of the issues that I've been involved with in the past, is that somebody hears something and then they just run with it, and trust me, that's where the knives start coming into your back. But you know, you just got to persevere. You got to have you know, a strong will. And, you know, to be honest with you, I mean, practicing law, doing criminal defense trials with some of the best legal minds, both in the DA's office and working with some of the best criminal defense attorneys, you learn to become pretty hard knocks, and you know, you learn to just become hard, and you try to leave that at the office, because you don't want to have that same atmosphere at home, because then it's a pretty dull life if you're just sitting there, you know, being, you know, at home all day long. But it's something where you know, you got to let stuff roll off your back, and you got to move forward. And as Kevin said, as Helen said, and even as the Congresswoman said, you got to sit there and just, you know, you run on your record. And if people like what you're doing, they're going to vote for you. If people don't like what you did, they're not going to vote for you. It's as simple as that.
Legislator Hardwick, you were talking about that you've run for office 10 times. To what degree should you be focused on your opponent? I've heard elected officials, some say that, you know, you just run your race and you ignore everybody else, and some say you have to be so focused on gearing your campaign to your opposition. What's your take on that?
Well, you have to. I mean, the opposition is half of the campaign, assuming there are only two candidates in the election. I mean, that would be like, you know, any sporting contest, a football game or whatever, not taking into account the strengths and weaknesses of the other team and trying to plan for that. You know, when the Buffalo Bills go out and play football, a lot of their time is spent looking at film of the other team and figuring out how they're going to attack certain things, how they're going to protect against certain things that the other team does. Same in politics. You know, in determining, I must confess, I really don't want to be on this panel. I want to be on the one this afternoon when we talk about campaigning, because I want to talk about some of my thoughts concerning campaigning, and I'll use this question as an opportunity to slide this in there. You know, on one level, the key to campaigns is simple. It's kind of like the game show Jeopardy. You know, you have some nights where you do really well on Jeopardy. You know, I don't have many of them, but you know, I have. And there are other nights when you say, where do they get these questions or these answers, and where do they get these people who know something about it? You know, when Alex goes, the final Jeopardy category is ding, and it says U.S. Congress. I say, hey kids, come on in the living room, you know, watch Daddy, you know, nail this one. See how smart Daddy is. I want everybody to sit down. I don't need to know what's behind U.S. Congress. I know the answer. If U.S. Congress is the category, I'm going to win Jeopardy. I'm going to bet the farm. If on the other hand he says the final Jeopardy category is Belgian philosophers, you know, who is Kierkegaard? I don't know. I say, kids, you know, maybe there's something else on another channel we could watch, you know, because I'm afraid I won't know. Well, winning elections, to a certain extent, in a very simplistic way, is controlling the Final Jeopardy category. It's paying Alex $100 to make the Final Jeopardy category U.S. Congress rather than, you know, Belgian philosophers, something that you know. It's not your answer to any given question, whether it's gay marriage or whether it's hydrofracking or whether it's whatever. It's what people come down to. You know, I may disagree with Senator Grisani on gay marriage. His opponent may agree with me on gay marriage, but I may agree with him on hydrofracking, where his opponent has the wrong answer. Senator Grisani, if he wants to get my vote, shouldn't try to convince me that he's right on issue, gay marriage or whatever, and I'm wrong. He's not going to do that. He should convince me that, yes, we have differences there, but then, you know, my opponent is for hydrofracking and I'm against it, and that's really more important. You know, you should vote based on hydrofracking. That should be the Final Jeopardy category, rather than gay marriage or something he knows we disagree on. That's the key to elections. It's not your position on any one issue. It's an issue or an image or a demographic variable, old versus young, male versus female, you know, black versus white, that you know you can win on and your opponent loses on. You got to know where your opponent is, where you are, something that resonates with people. You look at the classic example, the Democratic primaries 4 years ago, Barack Obama versus Hillary Clinton. If the Final Jeopardy category is experience, Hillary Clinton blows the doors off Barack Obama, right? Runs away with that election. That's what she wanted the Final Jeopardy category to be. Barack Obama wants it to be changed. That was a brilliant strategy, because if he can convince you, Democrats voting in the primary, that change is more important than experience, that change trumps the experience, then Hillary Clinton's experience becomes, you know, baggage, because experience is the opposite of change. It's same old, as opposed to change. And it was a struggle. I mean, Barack Obama didn't try to convince people in the primaries that he was more experienced than Hillary Clinton. He would have looked stupid doing that. He convinced people that change was more important than experience. And that's how he won, you know, that's how he won those primaries. It was a struggle over the Final Jeopardy category. So you have to know, getting back to the question, we're tied into the question, you have to know where your opponent is versus where you are. You have to pick something where your opponent is on one side and you're on another, and you know more people agree with you on that than they agree with your opponent, and then you've got to make that what people ask themselves when they go in the voting booth.
That was a great demonstration of something that I've always tried to impress upon candidates when I was a campaign manager, which is when you're in a debate, never answer the question that you were asked, answer the question that you wish that you were asked.
Yes.
And that's a good way of dealing with the media too, because oftentimes candidates think, oh, they're asking me a question, I have to answer that directly, but that question could be a minefield, right?
I could come back for that panel too.
Actually, me and Helen are hurt because he just said he didn't want to be on our panel.
Counselor, what in terms of retail politics, I mean, how many doors did you knock on? How much is that a part of campaigning, is just the going out and meeting the voters?
Number of doors that I knocked on, it was well into the thousands, because I would knock on doors on the weekends, I would knock on doors when I would get off work, I would knock on doors when I was in between lunch breaks, because it was very important to me to hear what the community was saying as a whole. And I'm going to go back when you said that, know the issue, you know, run on the opponent. I ran my campaign on not what my opponent was doing. I ran my campaign on the issues facing Syracuse. And I knew that it was economic, education, and public safety. And I ran my campaign on the three as one entity, because for me it all works hand in hand. Because if we educate our children, we're going to have the economic stability, and then public safety falls in place. So I based it on my record, because I have been out here for 15 years working with the police department, working with the district attorney, and as you said, crossing the lines to make sure that our communities are working in a collaborative manner so that we can move forward. So as far as the door knocking, I didn't just knock on the conventional doors. I was reaching out to the different branches of our government, our business world, and everybody that it takes to make a campaign effective and to run a winning campaign.
I'm going to open up to questions soon, but I just wanted to ask a question just to give people a sense of the time commitment and the schedule that entails running for office. You were saying you were knocking on doors on your lunch hour. I mean, between fundraising, canvassing, meeting the voters, I mean, what is this? What kind of impact does this have upon your life? And is it possible, you know, to work? Yeah, I mean, is just working hard at the crux of running for office?
Can I answer this one first? Yes. I want to go on the campaign. I just really want to say this. When we talk about public service and running a campaign, for me, it's become very money heavy. And I think that that's a disadvantage for most people that would want to run. If you don't have name recognition along with a money base, it's really going to be kind of null and void. So I would like to see the process start to flip a little bit. Because I don't think that as a local race, that I should have had to raise $60,000. It's a local council seat. It's not the Senate. But in this state, I had to raise $60,000 to be able to serve on a local level. And for me, I just think that's insane because the fundraisers, you're hitting the same people. You're tapping the same little circle over and over. I came out of organized labor and then the not-for-profit world. So thank God I had a huge support base with organized labor, because if not, that was my pool of financial resources. So I think that everybody needs to find the resources. Again, we talk about resources and support. And as the senator said earlier, you have to have at least 4, 5, 6 different support systems. So I took pride in being able to go to each branch, businesses, organized labor, community, all the branches, and I garnered support from each and every facet of my community. So I think as an effective campaigner, you're going to have to be able to touch into everything that's important to everybody in my region, because again, they're all in the community and they're all part of my community.
Yeah, Senator, I recently read that Congress members spend between an hour and 2 hours every day dialing for dollars. I mean, between, you know, and which is just awe-inspiring to me that that's such a big part of being in Congress. How much of it, you know, when you're running for office, you know, what's your schedule look like? You know, how much time are you spending knocking on doors? How much time are you spending fundraising? And how grueling is it really?
You know, I've never called up people, and I hate asking people for money. I really do. And you know what? You hit the nail on the head, because in the beginning when you're running, you are, you know, the circle of friends and family, you know, to come to the same, you know, event to try to raise money, and it almost gets to the point where it's kind of embarrassing. And they're kind of shying away from you, your own family. They're like, gee, I gotta go to another one of these events. You know, really what you do is you get other people to do it for you. I guess what you do. But the schedule is schedule's pretty hectic. I mean, literally from January till June, it's either 3, 4, or 5 days a week in Albany, and then, you know, even when you leave Albany and the drive is just a killer, the 4-hour drive back and forth. I mean, I got the car that I have, I already have 43,000 miles on it, and I just got it in January of last year. So, I mean, it's been only 16 months, and there's already 43,000 miles on this car. You know, but the time aspect of it, like this morning, for example, you know, I was at the Walenda event last night. I mean, that was pretty spectacular, and I was with my wife and my son. And I get up this morning, and she's like, where are you going? I said, well, I'll see you about 6 o'clock tonight. And I was, because I have a lot of events. And it's funny, because some of the events that Kathy Hochul talked about, the strawberry, I know exactly what she's talking about. It's in Brant, the parade's in Hamburg, and there's a Welcome Home Veterans at the Buffalo Naval Park. And you just kind of indoctrinate yourself and know that that's happening. And the time you spend, it's a significant amount of time. It's to the point where I go home, my own dogs bite me because they don't recognize who I am. But it's you know, it's worth it, and I guess it's more for me. It's more than the fire in the belly. For me, it's you know, wanting to go out there and meeting as many people as possible, wanting to know what their concerns are, what their issues are, and doing what I can to change that. I mean, I'm probably the only candidate that in literature in 2008 and in 2010, where I put my cell phone number saying, if you have any questions, here's my number, call me. And you know, to put that out there like that, you know, I've gotten a lot of calls, but trust me, I thought I would get calls in the tens of thousands. But it's to me, it's, you know, I'm just proud to be in this position. It's a privilege, and no matter how much time it takes to get something done, or no matter how much time it takes to make sure that your community is taken care of, I'm going to put as much time in as I possibly can. And the family, you know, my family just, they understand it now. They did in the beginning, but now they understand it, that this is basically how it's going to be.
Any other thoughts about that? And questions from the audience?
We are videotaping today's session so that it'll all be available to you in the future, so we do want to make sure we're using mic for questions.
Yeah, turn it on.
It says on.
I have a two-part question. About 3 years ago, I had an opportunity to moderate focus group, a couple of focus groups with village, town, city, and county officials. And two things came out of that specifically, I think, that are relevant here. There was a consensus that it takes a different set of skills to run in an election than it does to be an effective legislator. And you have to resolve that because when you get into office, negotiation and your ability to negotiate with other legislators becomes much more important, where when you're running for office, you're an individual and it's essentially a popularity contest. And then the other issue that came up was the fact that they felt they were ill-prepared to make the decisions that they were faced with once they were in office. Now, on this level, you know, I had village, town, city, and county officials. Land use planning, they didn't know anything about land use planning, and then they're in a position to make some significant decisions in that area, or budgets, and we could probably name, and hopefully you can name, a whole bunch of issues that you know very little about, and yet you have to make decisions on them. So would you address that? Do you agree with what the focus group members said?
Go ahead, Gary.
I guess being 6 months into office, I'll go first. As far as some of the budget process, I don't think that when I stepped into the role that it was going to be as enormous as it was. But as far as being prepared, I don't think that was a problem for me per se, because to be able, as a 29-year-old woman, when you go back into the history, making $8 an hour, to be able to keep my house for 30 years, I learned how to budget pretty well. So that for me was kind of simple. But when I talk about negotiating with my colleagues, that is not as difficult as I thought it would be either. You know, we find something in common, because in reality, I don't care if you're seasoned or if you're newly elected, we do have some of the same goals in common. We have the same interests for some of the community members as a whole. So when you touch on that and get them to understand, it's not about me and it's not about you. It's about negotiating the best deal for every taxpayer in the city of Syracuse. So 6 months in, and I'm not really having a real hard time on that, but I have 3.5 years to go, so there's more to come.
I think to the first part of your question, concerning the different skills required to run for office versus serve in office, I think there's a lot to be said for that. And I think it's it's more the case today than it ever has been before, especially in the higher profile offices. You know, to get elected in 2012 to state senate or something like that, you know, you have to be, it's a TV age. You have to come across good on TV in 8 seconds because that's all you're going to get, and that's all people are going to see. Campaigns are different now than they used to be, and once you get in office, the skills you need, you know, you are going to be able to, or you are going to want to be able to negotiate, to achieve a consensus, to build a consensus. Those are not necessarily the skills that get you elected. So I certainly can see something like that. In terms of, you know, what people know when they go in, yeah, most people don't know anything about land use planning, or how to adopt an ordinance, or what have you, a seeker process. They don't know the acronyms. That's why I would encourage anyone considering running for office in Western New York to enroll in Canisius College and take my state and local government class.
I was not a setup here.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, as far as, I'll give you a lot of examples. I chair the New York State Environmental Conservation Committee. I'm the chair of that committee. Did I have any prior knowledge on hydrofracking? No. Did I have any prior knowledge of poachers taking bear gallbladders, killing bears and selling the gallbladders to China? Absolutely not. You know, did you know anything about like the emerald shiners that are in our waters and not being able to be transported from one part of the lake to another? No. But let me tell you, you learn pretty quickly, and it goes back to what I said before. You learn pretty quickly by listening to people on both sides of an issue. If you only listen to one side of an issue, you're not going to have complete knowledge of what exactly is the problem. And something, you know, going back to a little bit what Kevin said, you know, during a campaign, actually, you want everybody to like you. So you know, you get out there and you know, you talk to as many groups as possible. But once you're in office and they know which way you're voting on certain issues, you find that, you know, you lose certain groups, you know, quickly. And it's unfortunate because, you know, it may just be on one issue where, you know, they need to take a look at the entire, you know, what you've done, you know, what your voting record is, what you've done for the area, not just on one particular issue. But you get to learn, you know, pretty quickly on some of the major issues. You know, for me on the budget and things like that, I knew that you know, most of the resources were continuously going downstate. It was an upstate downstate thing. So my fight and other members of the Western New York delegation, we meet and we try to make sure that, you know, we get definitely our fair share, if not more, of certain things back here to Western New York. And it wasn't happening before, and I think it's happening now, and that's one of the reasons why I ran, you know, going back to what I said in the beginning.
Was another question?
Yeah, I think it was the first Governor Cuomo who said you campaign in poetry, but you govern in prose. And there's certainly a different skill set between the two, and it's important to acknowledge that. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, you know, I would be the best for the job of legislator or something like that were I in office, but, you know, the process of running for office is so unfair or it's superficial or whatever the case may be. But that comes with the territory. And you have to understand that if you know, Roger Stone, who will speak later on today, he has a rule that says losers don't legislate. And so it's important to understand that, you know, you have to master the campaigning process if you want to have the opportunity to be a public servant. Yes.
Hi, my question was, when running for office, what sort of roles should the partner or spouse play? And what sort of public image should they hope to portray in order to best help the campaign?
Yes, spouse. The role of your spouse?
You know, when I first ran in 08 and 10, I never really saw spouses of candidates around. like they really weren't in the picture. But, you know, I mean, I love my wife, so I want her to be with me as much as possible and all the time. So I would take her, or my kids are in their 20s, so they don't really care. They're like, yeah, whatever, you know, I got other things to do. But you know, you try to, you know, I want my wife to be with me at every event possible. But literally, sometimes it gets to the point where, and I'm just speaking about my wife, where she would say, you know, I really don't feel like going. I mean, they may not be into politics or the conversations as much as, let's say, I am, or that you need to be. So then they, you know, they'll feel uncomfortable that it's not, you know, I'm there to support you in spirit, and you know, but my body's not going to be with you this time because I'm just not, you know, into some of the events that you go to. But it's important to have that strength and to be able to go home and you know, have that family time, because if you don't have that, it makes it pretty strenuous if you're not there, you know, spending time with your family and then doing your things, and you know, you're kind of stretched thin. But you got to make sure that you're there for your family and for your kids, you know. But you know, you always want your spouse there. It's just that they may not want to be there as much as you'd like them to be.
Depends on the spouse, and it depends on the family situation. Seriously, I mean, ideally you would like a spouse that's totally invested in the campaign and involved in every aspect of it. You know, every campaign that's, or most campaigns for significant offices, you're going to look for a volunteer coordinator. I mean, that's one of the positions in your kitchen cabinet. The best volunteer coordinator is probably the candidate's spouse if they're involved in the campaign. I mean, because your volunteers are going to be who? You know, you're going to be your neighbors, your friends, and people you know, which your spouse probably knows, hopefully. You know, that works well. But, you know, regardless of whether the spouse throws themselves into the campaign or not, they need to be consulted on the decision to run, because it's going to have running for office going to have a huge impact on the family. If you've got children, you're not going to be there. You're going to be missing things. They're going to be there, and they're going to be running kids around, and 2 kids in 2 places where you may have taken one kid one place and your spouse another place. Well, now they're doing double duty. They have to understand that there are also financial implications. I mean, you know, if you're like I was and did some consulting on the side and had to give that money up in order to campaign, well, that's going to create tension in the family. You know, there's going to be less money because you're going to be able to do less work if that's how you get your money. And we know that in relationships, money is the thing that, you know, leads to marital problems. And if there's less of it because you're out campaigning and can't be earning as much, well, you know, that's a factor. All these things need to be talked about going in. That doesn't mean that people aren't going to forget. Your spouse isn't going to forget that conversation you had when they said, oh yeah, I'm all in, because there are going to come times in every campaign where you just, you know, things come to a head and there's a big blow up. I mean, count on that. So it's the more you can prepare for that ahead of time, the better off you are. Obviously it's a critical relationship, and you have to do the best to maintain.
I worked on I interned for multiple campaigns. The last one was the Fahey campaign. My question to you is, when there's a big internal staff shake up and you think it's your inner circle, but then you change it like partway between the primaries and the election itself, how do you ensure the replacements are just as good as the other guy, and that you're actually getting good advice when all the staff might not necessarily be working together? Because internally, I think that was one of the major falters, being there 40 hours a week interning, and you kind of see all the office politics. Like, how do you ensure that everybody's on board to keep the message that you started off with stays on track?
Well, you know, I mean, for me, it was people that work for me actually are not just one party affiliation. I have independent, conservatives, Green, Democrat, Republicans. but naturally you're gonna want the individual to express the same, you know, really be on the same page with what some of your major issues are. So when you sit down and talk to somebody and interview them for a position, you just, I guess you just kind of get a gut feel. I've had a few people that, you know, they applied for it, but then they says, you know what, this job isn't for me, or it's taking up a lot of time compared to another job that I have, and they go, and there's no hard feelings or anything like that. And you just got to go out there again and you know, do another interview process with different people to make sure that they're going to fit in, not only with what your ideas are, but really how they're going to fit in with the office as well. Because, you know, 6 months out of the year you're basically in Albany, you have a district office here, so you got to make sure that they, you know, that they're all going to get along with one another. That, you know, they're not internally fighting back there, causing a problem. And then in Albany, really was the same thing, just doing a process where we interviewed people, try to get the best people that know how to do legislation as far as bill drafting, getting things done along those lines, but also hiring people that had the background, in this case for being the center of the NCON committee, that had some background information in environmental. So it's really having people that have not only a diversity in background and everything, but also that they can just all get along together. And I think a person will know if they're not getting along with you, you know, they may just step aside themselves.
And on both questions that were asked previously, I don't have a spouse, so that one I'm not going to answer. And that question that you just asked, I don't have any staff, so.
You know, in any campaign, there are going to be rivalries. I mean, people are going to be working for you, and yes, they want to win the election. Yes, they want to see you succeed, but they're looking to, you know, they have egos also and want to, you know, feel that they should be doing this job or they should be doing that job. You should be paying more attention to, you know, you like them better than you like me, someone else. It's difficult. I think it's incumbent upon the candidate, number one, to make sure that everybody feels a part of the team, that everybody feels that their contributions are being acknowledged and valued. And it's also equally important to have a good campaign manager who understands that, who can bring everybody together. It's kind of like being campaign manager is kind of being the coach of a team. And a lot of teams, there are rivalries between superstars. You know, each wanting to have their ego stroked and get more of the credit for the winning season than the other guy. So that's important, and there's no easy answer for that. Some people are better at it than others. My advice would be get a campaign manager who can, you know, who has experience at that and seems to get along with people and make people work well together. You know, build that good chemistry.
One more question, I think.
And it will be a very quick question because I want coffee too. Okay? I'm going to try to make it a yes or no for you guys. You have an incumbent who has a large war chest. He gets an opportunity to buy a lot of TV face time. You don't have a lot of money. Is there some way, I thought there used to be a rule or a law, at least in the federal government, that you had to give somewhat access to the underdog.
Well, that wasn't in paid time. That was there was the FCC's equal time rule, which is, you know, if a TV station does a profile of one candidate, it's incumbent upon them to do a profile of another candidate in their news, but not if you're talking about paid media, which is what you're talking about. No, there's no. They have to provide access. They can't say to Mark, well, we're going to give your opponent, allow them to buy $1 million worth of ad time, but we're not going to let you buy $1 million of ad time. They can't do that. But if you're talking about your campaign doesn't have the resources of the other, well, unfortunately, the answer is that's life. It's not an inspirational way. Was that the question?
I'll tell you why we don't have. I'll tell you why we don't have equal time is that cable TV stations in this country stand to make $900 million in this coming election cycle from campaign ads. And they don't want to give equal time because they want you to pay for it. And so we don't, in England, for instance, they do have equal time, but we have a system that's inherently inequitable in that sense. Yeah.
One more question, and then we'll take a break. Hi. I am an educator. I have my master's degree in education. I'm teaching for 6 years. Teaching is rewarding, however, it's not fulfilling. I'm on this planet to run for office, I feel. That's where the passion is. Now, my question is, I'm also active in the preservation world, which means in the past month I've been in the media a handful of times. That has already put a potential strain on my job. So while I go to run in for office, is there any, how do I run for office while being an educator and maintaining my education job and doing the campaign at the same time, staying out of the media, keeping the parents happy? They don't want their child's teacher constantly in the news, in the newspaper. In the past month, I've heard it already, and that's only over one preservation situation. So, how would you, if you were an educator, how would you go about that?
You know, that's difficult, and I can actually, you know, you don't want to be stressed about it, but I think what you need to do is, and actually, you don't want to leave your job because that's where your money's coming from. I guess the only thing you can do is, you know, just let that criticism or if somebody's saying something roll off your back, and whatever time you're not spending doing your job as an educator, just kind of turn a switch and, you know, do what you want to do as far as trying to run for office, and doing preservation work is excellent as a lead into, you know, get into a candidacy for certain things. So it's time consuming, especially when you have another job, and you just gotta know that it's going to be time consuming and get past that.
And also make sure that your employer is on board. I'm very fortunate that I work for a not-for-profit, but my employer and my board of directors were very, very gracious to allow me to run for this office. So with them being on board for me and being an educator, kind of sort of same thing, because the work that you're doing, you can do it from both ends. For me, I can. So that's been.
So, do you have tenure?
I'm in a charter school.
Ah.
Staying out of the media, running the campaign.
I feel your pain. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
tenure would have been so easy.
Yeah, I mean, candidates certainly sometimes suffer retribution from their employers because of the running for office, and their employers don't like it. I think Legislator Hardwick was making a great point before about the narrative, about, you know, framing your race in the way that you want it to be perceived. And I would think about talking to your charter school and impressing upon them, if I win this elected office, wow, this is going to be of enormous benefit to you, right? And so you really have to make sure that, you know, if they look at it like this is going to be an albatross upon them, then that's going to disrupt all the portions of your life. But you have to sell people on the benefits, right? I mean, everyone is looking at their own self-interest. And so you have to impress upon them how that's going to, you know, to benefit them.
And even if you had tenure, you've still got all these time considerations. You can't be two places at once, and you're always feeling guilty that you should be someplace else. I'm doing door-to-door, man, it's my kid's last Little League game, I should be there, but man, if I'm there, then I'm not enjoying it because I think, man, if I lose by one vote, I could have been out knocking on doors. There's this tension, and it just, and I don't know about you guys, but during campaign season, I'm up at 3 in the morning because I can't get back to sleep because the mind is racing, and it does take a toll on you. It's a consideration. There are a lot of considerations, you know. And the thing about campaigns, though, that are different than your job. You know, my job as a Canisius College professor, I don't go out of a lecture and high five the next professor coming in saying, yes, I won, yes. You know, it's another lecture. I've done hundreds of them, thousands of them. Campaigning is winning